long before the word Turk had ever echoed across the plateaus of Central Asia or the battlefields of Anatolia. A different kind of lineage was already being written, not in language, but in blood. The soil of Anatolia, the rugged backbone of modern Turkey, has always been more than just a crossroads of civilizations. It is a silent archive, whispering stories written in the marrow of bones, in the roots of wheat, and in the deep silence of ancient graves. 12,000 years ago, as the last ice age receded, Anatolia was not a blank slate awaiting conquerors. It was alive with small bands of hunter-gatherers who would become the earliest architects of genetic continuity in this land. They left behind tools, cave art, and above all, their DNA. We now know, thanks to ancient genome sequencing, that the very first farmers of this region were not immigrants from distant lands, but the children of these same hunters. In an age when most of Europe was still cloaked in forests and fear, Anatolia was already laying the foundations of agriculture and of genetic legacy. Those first Anatolian farmers didn't just stay put. They carried their seeds and their bloodlines across the Bosporus and into Europe, in a migration so vast and slow it was once invisible to history. But genetics doesn't forget. Today, we can trace modern Southern Europeans, from Sicilians to Tuscans, back to those Anatolian pioneers. This connection isn't poetic, it's literal. Stretches of identical DNA still bind their descendants together. It means that in every olive-skinned farmer in rural Italy, a whisper of ancient Turkey still lives. And then came the Bronze Age, around 2000 BCE. A new wave arrived from the steppes, tall, horse-breeding Indo-Europeans, who brought not only metallurgy and language roots, but also new blood. This genetic pulse coincides with the rise of the Hittites, the first empire to speak an Indo-European language. Their capital, Hattusa, now lies in ruins, but the genetic echo of their presence still hums beneath the skin of Central Anatolians today. Modern Turks carry fragments of that steppic heritage, not as invaders, but as buried threads, woven into a deeper Anatolian fabric. And yet, in all this, there is no mention of Turks as we know them, because they had not yet arrived. This is what makes the genetic past of Turkey so breathtaking, the depth of its indigenous inheritance. We tend to think of conquest as replacement, one people overrun by another. But in the case of Anatolia, the truth is far more complex and far more human. Each wave of newcomers, be they Hittites, Phrygians, or Persians, did not erase what came before. They layered upon it. And through it all, the DNA of those early Neolithic farmers, the very first ones to plant barley in this land, endured. This is not just science, it's identity. Because if you are Turkish today, your blood is older than the word Turk. It is older than empires, older than armies. It reaches back to a time when the world was still being shaped, and your ancestors were among its first architects. And this quiet, invisible survival is the first hidden secret of Turkish genetics. The wind over the Central Asian steppe carries a sound older than language. The hoofbeats of migrating clans, the crack of bows, the guttural syllables of forgotten dialects. In the 11th century, that wind turned westward. It whispered into the ear of Anatolia, and history shifted. But not the way we think. We often imagine the Turkic migrations into Anatolia as a tidal wave, erasing what was there, planting something entirely new. The reality, hidden in the double helix of Turkish DNA, tells a different story. It wasn't a wave. It was a thread woven carefully into a fabric already rich with color. When the Oghuz Turks crossed into Anatolia after the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, they brought with them a warrior tradition, a new language, and the seeds of empire. But genetically, they left only the lightest imprint. Most DNA studies now agree. The Central Asian contribution to the modern Turkish genome is small, just a whisper, around 9% to 22%, depending on the region and the method of measurement. And yet, their legacy feels enormous. How can a culture change the soul of a nation without changing its blood? The answer lies in assimilation. Not violent, not sudden, but generational. The Turkic identity spread not by replacing people, but by transforming how people saw themselves. Seljuk rulers didn't wipe out Anatolian populations. They ruled over them, married them, recruited them, absorbed them, Language shifted. Religion aligned. Stories changed. But the bones beneath the skin stayed largely the same. Autosomal DNA comparisons confirmed this subtle revolution. Modern Turks cluster genetically not with the Kazakhs, Uzbeks, or Kyrgyz, but with their neighbors, Armenians, Iranians, Greeks. Their genetic cousins are not nomads, but the settled people of the Old World, farmers, artisans, builders of cities that stood long before the Turks arrived. Even in the Y chromosome, the legacy of fathers, Central Asian haplogroups like C, M130, and O3 show up? Yes, but they're a minority. What dominates instead? Haplogroups from the Mediterranean, from the Caucasus, from the Fertile Crescent. This is not the signature of conquest. It's the signature of adoption. And yet, the myth of a pure Turkic origin persists, echoed in textbooks, stamped into identity cards, embroidered into the rhetoric of modern nationalism. But the helix doesn't lie. It carries the fingerprints of shepherds from Iran, warriors from the Caucasus, monks from Byzantium, and yes, nomads from the steppe. All of them. Together. So what do we call this fusion? It's not displacement. It's not dilution. It's synthesis. The Oghuz Turks didn't overwrite Anatolia. They added a chapter to its ongoing book. A chapter written in a new script, but on old parchment. And perhaps that's why Turkish identity today feels both ancient and new. Because it is. It began as a frontier principality, a forgotten tribe carving its way into the ruins of Byzantium. But within 2 centuries, it had become an empire that swallowed cities, continents, and civilizations. The Ottomans didn't just redraw maps. They remixed humanity. What made their conquests unlike any that came before wasn't merely the scale. It was the permeability. Borders didn't divide bloodlines. They dissolved them. Under the rule of the sultans, Anatolia became a genetic kaleidoscope. Every war, every treaty, every caravan that passed through its gates brought new strands of DNA. Some welcome, some enslaved, all absorbed. The Balkans sent waves of Slavs, Greeks, Albanians, and Bosniaks. Many of them arrived in chains, taken as boys through the Devserm system and raised as janissaries, elite soldiers loyal not to their ancestors, but to the empire that rewrote their fate. But fate left its mark. Their descendants walk the streets of Istanbul today, unaware that in their blood flows a blend of Orthodox peasant, Ottoman soldier, and Balkan exile. Haplogroups are 1A and I2, common in Eastern Europe, crept steadily into the Anatolian gene pool, especially in the west and north. These weren't traces of transient contact, they were inheritance. Then came the Caucasians. In the 19th century, fleeing Russian imperial expansion, hundreds of thousands of Circassians, Chechens, and Georgians poured into the empire. They brought their languages, their rituals, and their DNA, particularly haplogroup G, which now lingers like sediment in the mountains of the Black Sea coast. The Ottoman land stretched across 3 continents, and so did the migrations. From North Africa came Berbers and Arabs. From the Levant came Syrians and Palestinians. Their genes folded into the mosaic silently, line by line, without banners or battles. Yet even this immense admixture didn't erase the past. Instead, it wrapped the ancient Anatolian genome in new layers, a living palimpsest of every empire that had ever touched these lands. Beneath every strand of modern Turkish DNA lies a map, not of one country, but of centuries of empire, trade, displacement, and allegiance. The empire is gone, its borders shattered, its archives looted, its flags fallen, but its genes are still here, stitched invisibly into every Turkish surname, every neighborhood, every heartbeat. This is the secret history that monuments don't show. A history carried not in books, but in bone. Walk through a Turkish bazaar today. The faces, the voices, the rhythms, they seem unified, even familiar. But under the surface, something far more intricate pulses through the veins of this nation. Not one identity, but dozens. Not one ancestry, but an archive of migrations buried in the body of every citizen. Modern Turkey is not a monolith. It is a mosaic, and that mosaic is regional. In the West, the Aegean air still carries the echoes of Greek colonists and Roman merchants. Cities like Izmir and Çanakkale harbor a genome remarkably close to Southern Italians and Balkan Slavs. Here, haplogroups link to Europe, R1a, I2, and J2, exist in frequencies that silently betray centuries of intermarriage, trade, and conquest. This isn't theory. This is statistical evidence drawn from thousands of DNA samples, now digitized into national genome maps. Move inland, and the palette shifts. In central Anatolia, beneath the vast silence of the steppes and the weight of forgotten empires, something ancient survives. This is where Hittite blood still runs, not in name, but in nucleotide. The people of Konya, Kayseri, and Ankara carry DNA that shows limited admixture. Their genes whisper stories of long-settled farmers and bronzesmiths who lived and died on this land long before the Turks rode in from the east. But turn eastward, and you enter a different world altogether. Eastern Turkey does not echo, it hums. The genome here pulls heavily from the Caucasus and the greater Middle East. Haplogroups common in Armenia, Iran, and northern Iraq emerge with clarity, not just in the blood, but in the bones of local traditions, dialects, even diseases. Mountain villages act as genetic time capsules, communities so insulated that mutations have passed down unbroken, generation after generation. This regional fragmentation isn't weakness. It's a map, a living memory of how deeply geography and history entangle. And yet, for all these divisions, one finding stands above the rest. The Turkish genome is globally unique in its diversity. A study of over 3,300 unrelated individuals showed levels of variation that surpassed even the most genetically mixed populations of Europe. What this means is simple but profound. The people of Turkey don't just belong to one lineage. They embody the crossroads of humanity itself. From the Aegean coastlines to the Kurdish islands, from Cappadocian valleys to Thracian plains, each region of Turkey holds its own genetic fingerprint. No two parts are the same, and yet they share a single national breath. This is not a contradiction. It's a masterpiece, because what unites modern Turkey isn't genetic sameness. It's the astonishing fact that such difference could be woven into a coherent whole. High in the folds of Anatolia's forgotten mountains, where fog clings to crags like memory refusing to die, there are villages that speak in whispers, not of history, but of inheritance. Here, the past isn't written in books or monuments. It lives inside the body, preserved, unshuffled, untouched. In these micropopulations, remote Black Sea hamlets, Eastern Anatolian enclaves, highland plateaus sealed off by time, genetics becomes archaeology. Families have lived here for centuries, with minimal migration in or out. The result is startling. Ancient lineages, preserved with museum-like precision, passed down not through myth, but through mitochondria. Modern science calls them runs of homozygosity, long, uninterrupted strands of identical DNA inherited from both parents. But to understand what that truly means, you have to feel it. A lineage so enclosed that the past folds inward, collapsing onto itself. These aren't just genetic patterns. They're echoes of forgotten rituals, of isolated love, of silence. One Turkish family, in a secluded part of the southeast, walks on all fours. Not because of a myth, but because of a rare mutation, cerebellar hypoplasia, passed through generations by consanguineous marriage. They are not anomalies. They are windows into what happens when genes live too long in a closed loop. It is in these loops, however, that discovery thrives. Turkey's high inbreeding coefficients, especially in the East, where nearly 30% of individuals share kinship tighter than second cousins, have revealed rare loss-of-function mutations unseen anywhere else in the world. These mutations, once viewed as liabilities, are now invaluable keys unlocking the mysteries of inherited disease. Geneticists didn't expect to find so much variation here, but they did, because Turkey's mountains don't just preserve language or custom. They preserve entire genomic legacies. Some of the longest homozygosity segments ever recorded, over 40 million base pairs, were found in Turkish individuals from such secluded regions. This isn't coincidence. It's cultural geography intersecting with molecular fate. In these isolated genomes, we find stories written in a script older than any alphabet. A child with a rare disorder becomes a map of ancient settlement. A single genetic anomaly tells us not just about one village, but about where humanity once paused, settled, married, and stayed. Turkey's diversity is often celebrated, but its isolation is just as crucial. Because in isolation, time slows. In isolation, secrets survive. And it is in these quiet corners of Anatolia that the DNA of lost civilizations continues to breathe, not through ruins, but through people. In the digital age, we archive everything: photos, documents, footprints on social media. But long before we stored our lives in clouds, evolution stored our stories in silence, deep inside our DNA. And for Turkey, that archive has a name: the Turkish variome. It's not just a database. It's a revelation. When scientists sequenced the genomes of thousands of Turkish individuals, they expected a familiar pattern: overlap with neighboring populations, echoes of Eurasian migrations. But what they found was something different, something singular. Nearly half the genome variants they uncovered had never been seen before. Not in Europe, not in the Middle East, not anywhere. In the world of genetics, that's not just rare. That's revolutionary. These were not cosmetic mutations. Among them were high-confidence loss-of-function alleles, genetic switches that, when turned off, can cause diseases or protect against them. They were scattered across the Turkish genome like forgotten signatures. And they weren't imported. They were born here. What makes this discovery even more extraordinary is the balance it reveals between diversity and continuity. For all of Turkey's complex admixture, its history of conquest, assimilation, and empire, the population still maintains private genetic markers that haven't been diluted or lost. Instead, they've been protected by centuries of cultural patterns, marriage traditions, and regional isolation. Some of these alleles are linked to immunity. Others influence metabolism. A few appear only in one region, in one clan, in one family. And yet together, they form a map of uniqueness, a pattern so distinct that it separates Turkish DNA not just from neighbors, but from the rest of the human species. This isn't just about health. This is about identity. Because a nation's true signature doesn't live in borders. It lives in code. The Turkish variome has now become more than a scientific tool. It is a mirror reflecting 1,000 years of genetic survival, innovation, and resilience. It holds within it the raw material for breakthroughs in medicine, diagnostics, and personalized care. But it also whispers something deeper, something cultural, that amidst globalization and shifting identities, there are still places on Earth where the genome has its own dialect. This signature cannot be borrowed. It cannot be faked. It is the residue of time itself. And when we look into the Turkish variome, we are not just seeing data. We are witnessing the fingerprint of civilization, pressed not onto stone, but onto flesh. Some truths are buried not under stone, but beneath silence. And in Turkey, silence is policy. For decades, the genome has been a guarded frontier, not by nature, but by law. Ancestry tests are discouraged. DNA kits intercepted. Why? Because beneath the surface of national identity lies a contradiction too powerful to ignore. The story genetics tells is not the one taught in schools, recited in state rituals, or stitched into the fabric of nationalism. Because genetics has no loyalty. It doesn't bow to flags. It remembers everything, even the things a nation forgets. Take the myth of Turkic purity. It's a story told with pride, that modern Turks are the direct heirs of Central Asian conquerors, linguistic siblings of Mongols, the bloodline of warriors on horseback. But when geneticists looked under the microscope, that myth fractured. The evidence: almost no Mongolian DNA. Despite the linguistic ties that link Turkic languages with the Altaic family, the genome tells a different tale. Modern Turks are genetically closer to Greeks, Tuscans, and Circassians than to Uzbeks or Mongols. The Central Asian legacy is there, yes, but it is a strand, not the spine. And still, the narrative persists. Political narratives rarely yield to science. In fact, they often fight it. Some officials argue that ancestry testing destabilizes unity, threatens identity. But identity built on fiction is fragile. Truth, even when uncomfortable, endures. Cyprus offers one of the clearest mirrors. Greek and Turkish Cypriots, long divided by borders and history, turn out to be nearly identical at the genetic level. Their differences, as it turns out, are political, not biological. They share the same ancient Anatolian roots, the same prehistoric migrations, the same maternal lines. And then there's the taboo of admitting how many Turkish haplogroups trace back to pre-Turkic civilizations. Hittites, Phrygians, Byzantines. These are not foreign elements. They are the original architects of the land. Yet in textbooks, their presence is minimized, sometimes erased. But DNA doesn't erase. It preserves. There's a reason the Turkish state has resisted widespread genetic testing. Because data has no ideology. It doesn't care who won the war. It only remembers who survived. In this, perhaps, lies the most dangerous power of genetics. Not that it exposes lies, but that it restores memory. And in a nation layered with conquest, conversion, and complexity, memory is the most radical force of all. There are maps we draw with borders, lines inked by conquest, by treaties, by wars we think define us. And then there are maps etched in chromosomes, older, unchangeable, immune to politics. When you zoom into the Turkish genome, what unfolds isn't a boundary, it's a bridge. For millennia, Anatolia has been the stage of relentless movement, not just of armies, but of ancestors. Its soil has absorbed the footprints of Neolithic farmers, Indo-European migrants, Persian satraps, Arab traders, Slavic refugees, and Turkic tribes. Each wave came with a story. But what makes Turkish DNA astonishing isn't just who came. It's that no one ever left. Instead of displacing one another, these lineages layered. They mingled. They survived. That's why modern Turks don't belong to a single tree of ancestry. They're part of a forest, with roots pulling from southern Europe, branches reaching toward Iran, and leaves that catch winds from the Caucasus and Central Asia. The genome doesn't lie. It shows proximity to populations as diverse as Tuscans, Oghuz, northern Iraqis, and Iranians, a convergence of migrations that most nations would need continents to achieve. But this complexity doesn't dilute identity. It deepens it. Turkish genetics is not a tale of fragmentation. It's a story of synthesis. Where other nations chose exclusion to preserve purity, Turkey evolved by embracing contradiction, and contradiction became its strength. We see this in mitochondrial DNA, maternal lines that reveal continuity stretching back to prehistory. Long before names like Turk, Arab, or Greek even existed, these women were crossing rivers, raising children, leaving imprints we now read as genetic signatures. They weren't rulers. They weren't recorded in annals. But they are in us. We see it in Y-DNA haplogroups, in the traces of Indo-Europeans, Semites, and Caucasian warriors. All of them, strands of story embedded in the male line. They don't contradict the Turkish identity. They expand it. And then there's the unspoken message, that in a world obsessed with walls and definitions, Turkish DNA refuses to fit cleanly into a box. It's not just a national code. It's a record of civilization. Because in truth, what Turkey's genome reveals is not just the history of one people, but the blueprint of humanity itself. We are not static. We are not pure. We are the result of movement, of adaptation, of survival. In every Turkish cell is the proof. The human identity was never meant to be simple. It was meant to be shared.